When I was a kid, my family had this tradition. Every November, we'd spend a long weekend in upstate New York, near the edge of the Adirondack Mountains. My Aunt Laura owned a 6-acre property out near Old Forge, with a big old lodge-style house that had way more space than anyone ever used. 5 bedrooms, a giant wraparound deck, and a basement filled with random antiques she collected from flea markets. 2 of the bedrooms were set aside for us kids. Me, my younger brother Ethan, and my cousins Max and Leo. The rest were for the adults. Aunt Laura was a huge outdoors person. Hiking, kayaking, tracking. She knew the trails out there better than most rangers. My mom liked nature too, but only in the way where she could admire it from inside with a cup of tea. The backyard blended right into dense forest. Aunt Laura had marked her property line with faded blue ribbons tied to the trees. And beyond those ribbons was just endless wilderness. The nearest home that way wasn't even visible through the trees. During lunch one afternoon, while the adults were talking about some local bear sightings, me and the boys got what felt like a genius idea. We wanted to camp in the woods by ourselves. Just one night. Our moms weren't thrilled, but our aunt and my dad said yes, a little too quickly. They'd both had a couple drinks by then, which probably helped our case. Still, they promised to help us set up a tent. They led us beyond the blue ribbons into an area with soft pine needles and a little clearing that looked like it had been used before. My aunt said it was an old campsite she and her brother used as teens. The ground was level, and someone long ago had arranged a ring of stones for a fire pit. We were all between 10 and 13 that year. I was the oldest at 13, then Ethan and Max were both 11, and Leo was 9. None of the younger girl cousins came with us. They stayed behind with the moms, doing whatever indoor kids do. My aunt and dad gave us this half-useful, half-chaotic tutorial on how to set up a tent. They insisted we learn independence, which mostly meant they watched and corrected us, while laughing at how clueless we looked. Eventually, we got the tent standing, tossed in our sleeping bags, and headed back before sunset. At dinner, the moms once again voiced concerns about us being alone in the forest, but the adults brushed it off. I remember my dad joking that the woods were peaceful enough that they'd hear us scream if anything weird happened. That joke did not age well. After dark, our aunt and dad walked us back to the clearing. We each carried a flashlight, extra blankets, and I brought a deck of Phase 10 cards so we wouldn't get bored. When we settled inside, the adults said goodnight, and their flashlight beams disappeared between the trees. Suddenly, it was just us. And honestly, the tent felt a lot farther from the house than earlier. The forest swallowed all the light from the property. We were playing cards for maybe 20 minutes when we heard it. A distant scream. Sharp, high-pitched. It echoed between the trees. We froze. It sounded like a woman or a teenage girl, but I'd seen videos before where bobcats scream like that. So I said it was probably one of those. Max calmed down. Even Leo seemed to buy it. We kept playing. I started winning too much, and they accused me of cheating, which helped lighten the mood. Then it happened again. much closer this time. And this time, it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. Someone yelling in pure terror, just beyond the clearing. Every hair on my arms stood up. Nobody talked. Nobody moved. I switched off my flashlight, told everyone else to do the same, and we slid into our sleeping bags in the dark. We whispered about whether we should run, but the thought of sprinting through pitch-black woods with some unknown thing out there, none of us could make ourselves do it. Staying put in the tent felt safer than moving. Then came the sound I will never forget. Footsteps, fast ones, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, running straight toward us. They stopped right outside the tent. For a second, everything was silent. And then, a scream exploded, louder than anything I've ever heard, right next to us. It sounded like a woman trying to rip her lungs out. At the same time, the whole tent shook violently, like someone was pulling or slapping both sides at once. We all screamed, not bravely, just pure fear. I yanked the zipper open and we bolted into the woods with our flashlights bouncing everywhere. Branches smacked our arms and faces as we sprinted. We didn't stop, didn't look back. It felt like something was right behind us, breathing down our necks. By the time we crashed into the yard, everyone from the house was already outside because they'd heard our yelling. But the first thing I noticed, my sister and the girl cousins were already inside, in their pajamas, half asleep. They hadn't gone anywhere. I immediately accused my dad and aunt of sending someone to scare us. But when they swore they hadn't, and when we realized none of the neighbors were close enough to have run out there, the mood shifted hard. Something was out there, something none of us knew. My aunt and dad grabbed a pair of old hunting rifles and went out searching with the adults. They came back an hour later, shaken, but empty-handed. No footprints they could follow, no signs of anyone. The next morning, we packed up the tent. None of us spoke much during the whole process. We never camped there again. Honestly, we barely went outside after dark for the rest of the trip. To this day, none of us know what we heard or who was standing just outside that tent in the middle of the Adirondack woods. And whenever someone brings it up, the part that scares me the most isn't the scream or the shaking tent. It's the silence after whatever it was. Back in the early 2010s, my friend Caleb and I were obsessed with exploring the stranger corners of the Pacific Northwest, especially the Olympic National Forest in Washington. We were both born and raised in the Seattle area, so those fog-soaked mountains felt like home to us, the kind of place you escape to when city life starts grinding your nerves into dust. We'd camp all over, along the Hoh River, the foothills near Mount Storm King, and once even along a tiny stretch of the Quinault rainforest that we probably weren't supposed to be on. One trip stands out more than any other. We'd come across a tiny clearing on an old map of abandoned ranger routes. No modern markings, no sign anyone camped there. Exactly the sort of uncharted place Caleb loved for his photography. He always carried some bulky Canon DSLR with 3 lenses and would go off on speeches about how phone cameras cheat the soul out of a shot. Meanwhile, I was the guy scribbling melodramatic notes in a weather-beaten journal and snapping blurry pics on my old Android. We made camp beside a cluster of ancient cedars and cooked dinner on a tiny portable stove before turning in. It was the kind of calm night where the forest felt almost too quiet, like it was waiting for something. But nothing happened, and we woke up the next morning rested and ready to explore. A narrow creek cut through the area, so we followed it upstream. Mist clung low across the stones in a way that made everything surreal. Caleb stopped every few minutes to take photos, first of an osprey diving for fish, then of a black-tailed deer standing still as a statue. Later, we spotted what we were almost sure was a bobcat slinking through a patch of sword ferns. By midday, we settled for lunch under a granite outcrop. I was writing in my journal when Caleb suddenly shouted for me to come over. He'd found something. Between two boulders was a narrow entrance, a slanted opening in the rock, almost perfectly hidden unless you were standing in just the right spot. A cave. I felt uneasy looking at it. The forest here was home to cougars and black bears, and caves weren't exactly safe surprises in my book. I told him we should probably skip it, but Caleb insisted. He just wanted a few shots of the entrance, nothing more. We had bear spray and kept some distance, so I reluctantly followed him toward it. Inside, the cave swallowed all light instantly. The air felt colder. I flicked my flashlight on and warned Caleb not to use flash. If anything was inside, I didn't want to blind and provoke it. The cave sloped down, not far, but just enough that you couldn't see what was below. Then something cracked under my shoe. I looked down. Before I could say anything, Caleb gripped my arm and whispered, "Look." There was movement deeper in the dark. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then a shape flickered across the flashlight beam. Tall, thin, unmistakably human-shaped. My whole body tensed. I called out softly, "Hello? Are you okay in there?" The echo bounced around the walls. For a moment, nothing. Then, very quietly, "Go." Caleb whispered that we needed to leave immediately. He had a fear in his voice I'd never heard before, but some stupid part of me was curious. There were legends about off-grid people living deep in the Olympic wilderness. Hermits, survivalists, families who didn't want to be found. My grandfather used to tell stories about one such group he'd seen while backpacking decades earlier. So the idea that someone actually lived in this cave felt surreal and strange and a little mesmerizing. I took another step forward, and that's when the voice came again. Louder this time. "Go, now." Followed by a cascade of angry shouting I couldn't make out. Caleb didn't wait. He grabbed my jacket and practically dragged me out of the cave. We didn't stop moving until we were well away from the entrance. We both kept glancing behind us, half expecting someone to be following. By the time we got back to camp, it was mid-afternoon. All I wanted was to collapse and write, clear my head. But the sight that greeted us froze us in our tracks. Our tent was splattered in red. At first, our brains went straight to the worst possibilities. We'd been talking about cave dwellers the entire walk back, so our imaginations filled in the blanks. But once we got closer, the smell hit us. Chemical, artificial. It was spray paint. Someone had coated the front of the tent in red graffiti. streaked across the canvas. Several lines dripped down like messy brushstrokes. The flap was half unzipped, and the inside was splattered too. And across the fabric, in shaky lettering, someone had written, "Leave." We didn't argue with the message. We packed up everything that wasn't ruined and hiked the 2 hours back to the car, barely speaking the entire way. That night, we got a motel room in Forks and wandered into a diner across the street. The guy working the counter laughed when we told him what happened. According to him, there were problem groups in that part of the forest. Small pockets of people camping illegally, some dealing with substance issues, some armed, some just trying to stay hidden. Sometimes they stayed in caves. Sometimes they didn't like strangers snooping around. He said we were lucky it was just paint. I never found out if he was being serious, or if he was trying to spook a couple of campers for fun. But the way he said it, casual, almost relieved, stuck with me. Caleb and I kept exploring for years after that, though we stayed far away from unlisted sites. And caves, especially caves. Because every now and then, when I'm alone in the woods, I think about that voice in the darkness and the quiet rage in it, like we'd intruded on something we weren't meant to see. And I still wonder, what would have happened if we'd stayed a minute longer? When I was younger, the age where impressing someone felt like a life or death mission, I did a lot of things I cringe at now. But the one I'll actually admit to is the night I agreed to join a protest in a tiny village on the edge of Snowdonia National Park in North Wales. I had a hopeless crush on a girl named Mara, who was passionate about stopping a planned industrial development near her hometown. She made it sound like a peaceful demonstration. A few signs, some chanting, then back home for dinner. Easy. I found out I had severely misunderstood when she took me to an outdoor shop to buy camping gear. Apparently, we weren't just protesting. We were staying at the site overnight to block any early morning construction vehicles. And because I was trying desperately to look like the type of guy who got it, I nodded along like I totally understood environmental activism. At sunrise the next day, about 100 people pitched their tents along a rural road leading toward the valley. Someone had set up a speaker, blasting the clash, and whenever a car slowed to pass, the whole group chanted in unison, shaking their signs above their heads. By evening, most of the snacks people brought had disappeared, but someone had shown up with a portable grill and enough food to feed the entire camp. After eating, everyone drifted back to their tents. Mara and I had gotten there late, so our tents were farther from the main group, but I didn't think it would matter. Just before turning in, she handed me a canned cider from her cooler and thanked me for coming. I pretended it was no big deal, even though my heart was having its own protest inside my ribcage. Then night came. Hours later, I woke to the sound of angry shouting. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, until I unzipped my tent and saw a man standing a few meters away in the moonlight, holding what looked very much like a shotgun. His expression was furious. His words were slurred by his accent and my half-awake state, but the message was obvious. We were on his land, or at least a sliver of it. Mara scrambled out of her tent beside mine, wearing a Jurassic Park t-shirt. In any other situation, I might have made a joke about dinosaurs, but the only prehistoric thing I cared about in that moment was the ancient-looking weapon pointed in our direction. In pure panic, instead of running toward the other protesters, the logical move, we ran away. Down the road, toward the woods, which was absolutely the worst possible choice. But panic doesn't consider logic. The forest swallowed us instantly. The moon barely reached the ground. Branches scraped my arms, and something snagged my ankle, sending me crashing onto my knees. By the time I pushed myself up, I'd lost track of Mara. Everything looked the same. Identical thick oaks, ferns brushing my legs, patches of brambles. It was almost silent, except for the distant sound of the man shouting. The echo made it impossible to tell where he really was. Then I heard it. Not his voice, but a cry, a short, sharp yelp. Mara. I forced myself toward the sound. Branches whipped my face, the cold stinging every cut. When I stumbled into a clearing, I saw her. And the man. His back was to me, the shotgun angled away, but close enough that I froze. For a moment, I wasn't even sure he was looking at her. His head kept darting from side to side, like he was listening to something deeper in the woods. I shouted, pleaded, really. Told him we were lost, that we hadn't meant to trespass, that if he let us go, we'd walk straight back to the protest camp and never return. I even claimed it had been entirely my idea, so he wouldn't blame her. And then he started laughing. Not a warm laugh, not relieved. More like the kind of laugh someone gives when they've reached the end of their patience and can only find the situation ridiculous. He muttered something about not being the only ones wandering around tonight, which at the time I didn't understand. But the way he glanced over his shoulder toward the darkness behind him made my stomach drop. He told us to walk with him, not threatening, exactly, more like urgently, like he didn't want to be out there alone any more than we did. When we eventually broke through the tree line, the protest camp was still awake, still noisy, still visible. The farmer's shoulders relaxed the moment he saw the glow of flashlights and heard the crowd's voices drifting across the field. Back at the edge of his property, he lowered the shotgun. In the light, I noticed rust eating through the metal. He admitted it probably wouldn't fire, even if he tried. He apologized, sort of, and invited us to his farmhouse for tea so we could calm down. His wife told us he'd come outside earlier because he'd thought he heard someone walking near their barn. Someone who didn't answer when he called out. She said strangers sometimes wandered the forest at night, though she didn't explain what kind of strangers. Mara and I never found out what or who he thought he'd heard before he found us. I never got a date with her, but we stayed close friends. And whenever she brings up that night, we both get quiet at the same part. When the farmer kept turning toward the woods, like he expected something to step out at any moment. I didn't go back to that protest. Sometimes I wonder what happened with it, but mostly I wonder what else was in those woods with us that night, and whether the farmer was truly chasing us or trying to run from something else.